Hi, welcome back to the State of E-commerce. As always, I'm TJ Highland, joined by my colleague Ben Stein, and this week we have Kevin Sanderson. Kevin, how's it going?
I'm excited to be here. Talking about the state of e-commerce.
Absolutely. So Kevin and I have known each other for a couple of years now, dating back to a couple other companies we used to work with. But I think a little bit of background on Kevin. He's definitely a thought leader in the space. He helps 6- and 7-figure Amazon sellers expand to Amazon's international marketplaces, for example, Canada, the UK, Australia. We're going to talk through that today. He's also the host of the Maximizing e-commerce podcast and YouTube channel. So absolutely look him up on YouTube after this and learn some of his other wisdoms that he's not able to part with us today. So Kevin, how's it going?
Yeah, super excited. Super excited. It's one of those funny things. I live in kind of a random part of Florida that's kind of like South Florida-ish. And I was excited because in separate conversations with each of you, you actually knew where I'm from, and you both knew where Stuart, Florida is, which is like the town right next to me. I'm like, nobody knows that. So we've all got lots in common here.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, one of those things is e-commerce. So I know we have a couple of slides, and I know, Kevin, you wanted to I think it's important to start with your story and let obviously everyone know kind of how you got involved in this and, kind of add to your credit as to why you're here talking about it. So I think it's important to just let you take over and we'll jump in as we go.
Okay, sure. I guess you could say I was a little bit of a entrepreneur. I wanted to get into the world of e-commerce. I was working for the man, so to speak, at an insurance agency, running a call center, and things were going pretty well there, but I was like, I really want to do my own thing. And so, as you can see in that slide there, I took a season's worth of earnings as a high school football official to put towards a product on Amazon to sell it and then scale it up. And then about 3 years later, I left to go do all this full time. But I will just say this, if you look at that slide, yes, that is actually me in both pictures, the one with the black and white stripes. You can see why, and I did it for 10 seasons. I'm not doing it anymore now. I might do it again in the future, but I was a football official, high school level for 10 seasons, and pretty much every Friday night I would watch afterwards. I would watch like the news and see the highlights. And so you can see why maybe 5 people in 10 years recognized me. And it was usually because they knew like what game I was at. And so they would see, like, they would be able to find me. So I'd only know it was me from where I was standing. So it's hard to tell that that's actually me in those pictures. But basically, one of the things as I was scaling up, I realized, what it comes down to is it is all about having more, what's the word I'm looking for? More places that you can get your product in front of people. And so with the fact that you've got, X number of units of a product, and if you want to add more products, that's great. But really what it comes down to is you want more people to see your product. And so, if you're selling on Amazon in the US, there's a limit, there's a ceiling at some point for your product. And the interesting thing is once you get to that limit, you got to find other places. And so I would try things like eBay and Etsy, try jet.com, which is no longer even around. And so you try all these different other marketplaces, or, build my own store. And then I realized with my own store, I got to develop my own traffic. Or if I'm going into eBay, Etsy, these other places, which are all great. And I think there are things people should do as part of their arsenal. But I was like, if I'm able to figure out how to sell on Amazon in the US, once I jump through some of those hoops in other marketplaces outside of the US, it literally is no different than just the
Looks like we lost you there, Kevin, for a second, but
can hear me. It looks like I got lost there for a moment.
You're back on, no worries.
Okay, good. Yeah, so basically, just to show you guys here, I took this screenshot last night. So this is from 2 days ago, 30 days prior. So basically go 30 days back from 2 weeks ago. You can see how those sales outside of the US represented a 65% increase on top of my US sales. Now, of course, the disclaimer is we can't guarantee what anyone's sales might look like outside of the US. I didn't purposefully like add products in Canada or the UK, but didn't add them into the US. In fact, the US is where I have the most active SKUs. But what I've come to find, and we'll get into some slides on this here in a little bit, is the growth is better outside of the US. And so, if anyone's watching this and they're selling on Amazon, they're trying to figure out like, okay, where do I go next to grow in the international, or just to grow in general? This is where you want to go. I truly believe is Amazon's international marketplaces before you start focusing on, maybe some things that are, we'll just say, shiny objects outside of the US.
Right. One of the things that we talk about often is, Amazon has set up their international marketplaces to function very similar to at least the US, or to make them all function very similar to each other. So if you understand how the keywords work and the logistics works and the returns and your order rate and tracking all the things that you do maybe on your first or your domestic market, migrating that to go look at what it seems like in Canada or in the UK or in Germany, should not be reinventing the wheel each time. So
right.
For you as a business or an entrepreneur, you're not spending time learning a new marketplace or a new platform, and you're leveraging something that you've already spent the time learning. In addition to that, and I'm not sure if you do this, but FBA makes this very easy for you to do in terms of fulfillment. If you think about as a business, 10 years ago or so, how are you going to quickly and efficiently deliver products and cost effectively deliver products to Italy and Spain from the US? So, looking into different solutions like that.
Yes. So that is the interesting thing, is that, when you're in other marketplaces, the interesting thing is, like you said, it's very similar to how the US works. Like the algorithm works very similarly. If you understand paid ads, if you understand how inventory works, if you understand how to set up listings, all those things are very similar. So people in Canada, for the most part, use almost identically the same words to describe things people in the US do. In the UK, they speak English. For the most part, they use the same words, but some products you may find that there are some different keywords that maybe you want to make sure are in your listings. So that's the interesting thing. And, once you're up and running, it kind of runs itself. And so, I have a service where I help people launch into international marketplaces. And a lot of the clients I've worked with have found that, it's not like if they go into a second marketplace, they're doubling the amount of time that they spend in the US marketplace. So it could be they're just feeding a little bit of inventory. Once they've got their ads running, they may, admittedly, I probably check my ads outside of the US, except for the holiday season where it's busier, but I might check my ads maybe a couple times a year, just because they're kind of firing on full cylinders at that point.
So one question that I have, Kevin, is,
Sure.
We see international growth as it relates to e-commerce on the rise. I think, the estimate is that international is going to go like 8 or 9% over the next year. And, I see you're selling or active in 11 marketplaces.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned, going with the English speaking marketplaces first and then expanding from there. What else, if other factors, have driven your decisions to expand to, Germany, France, Spain, Italy, Australia and Asia?
Well, this door is closing, but I've got a solution to it. Is that historically you've been able to have inventory stored in the UK and then shipped to customers throughout Europe. However, once you get outside of the Brexit world that's happening right now, what's crazy is the what's the word I'm looking for? The crazy thing is come January 1st, the border is closed. And so the ability to go into, other countries quite the same way that you can now. So actually, let me take a step back. That might make more sense. I'm just moving something here on my screen. But basically with today, as it works, you could sell something that you have stored in the UK to a customer in France or Germany, and it's not that much different than shipping it from, let's say, Florida to North Carolina. Right. Whereas come January 1st, to ship something from the UK to France is about the same as shipping it from Mexico to Canada. It's two completely different kind of countries. So there is a solution where you could use Germany as a hub to ship out of, which is what I'm most likely going to be doing come January 1st.
So that's something a great solution too, especially you from an experienced seller, knowing how to navigate the international waters.
Yeah, and because one of the things is if somebody is not, regardless whether they use somebody like me, I've got free YouTube content where I describe how to do this. I know you guys have a lot of good resources as well. Is that if someone's looking to launch into another marketplace, if they don't do it, they're probably just leaving money on the table. And it's one of those things where when you look at all the things you could do to get another 10, 15, 20% more sales, international could be one of those low-hanging fruit. Maybe you might see a 65% bump like I have, but you will never know until you try.
And I think what's important or what we should focus on, I think we have a couple of slides, is the growth that you've seen and on some of the international marketplaces. So obviously you've been selling on the US for the longest out of all of these, and obviously have the most number of sales and units sold. So the opportunity for you to grow is obviously still there. You're still growing at a positive rate, which is great, but it's not the greatest opportunity to grow, right? With frankly being said, right?
Right, exactly. And there's a lot more competition. I mean, I think one of the things is that, Amazon has had all of this growth in the US this year. Amazon's having record numbers. People have been quarantined. People that never were buying stuff online are now Prime members. I hear all these statistics about, the increase just in Prime, so all these people that, basically they can just now, rather than going to, fighting a crowd of people at Best Buy or Target on Black Friday, they can just hit a button on their phone and something arrives at their door 2 days later, or sometimes even that day. And so, of course, people are looking to solutions like that. But at the same time, too, I think in the US, there's been a lot more people that are thinking about Amazon, like maybe they're furloughed and they're thinking about, I want to try something different, or, just maybe people are just saying, craziness in the job market in the US. And so they're trying to find something different. And so I think what happens is people get, people are testing out the waters in the US more so because it's such the hot topic. And so Amazon.com is a hot topic. So there is growth, but I truly believe a lot of it too is there is, what's the word I'm looking for? There is growth, but at the same time too, that growth, you're sharing it with more people, I should say. And so when you're looking at how do I grow, you want to look at, okay, where are the opportunities out there where maybe there's kind of some of the lowest hanging fruit. So when you look at this slide here, you can see like I had growth year over year. I've got two different slides there. And just to throw it out there in case someone's looking, if they remember from the slide from, a couple slides back where we had like the sales, these are taken on 2 different days. So they represent slightly different periods, and the way the, what's the word I'm looking for? The holiday season kind of cycles. We're still in the middle of it as we are recording this. And so the crazy thing is there's still several, really peak days, probably about a week's worth, I think, for, how my cycle usually works of peak sales. And so these numbers will just keep getting bigger. But at the same time too, you can see, so my units went up by 3%, but my dollar growth went up by 9%, which is still solid. I mean, that's almost, double digit growth. When you look at, the Fortune 500 world, if they get, 9% increase in sales, in most cases, that's like, celebrating. That's huge. And so, right. That's just throwing in growth year over year. And, there's been a lot of challenges, which I'm sure a lot of people can attest to. So if, people are selling on Amazon, we've had where we can only sell or send in so many units. There's all kinds of things like that are happening. so it's like we're having to play a kind of a different game than we even were last year. And so, I was just corresponding with someone earlier today, and he was telling me, probably at least $250,000 of sales he's lost because of inventory sitting at the back of a warehouse waiting to be checked in. And so, you hear a lot of stories like that, especially in the US, because I think there has been so much growth. Amazon's, I think, done a great job with what they could for the level of growth they've had as a company. But sometimes at the individual seller, you want to go where you're going to get the growth, not necessarily just the company as a whole, because otherwise we feel like we're just donating to the company's growth.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point too, is kind of, going where the puck is going to be, right? To use that Wayne Gretzky famous quote.
Yes.
And something you just said that I think is really impactful too is, Amazon is growing year over year. We are seeing the growth. We're seeing 150 new people sign up for Prime in 2020. They're now shopping online. People are at home. But then conversely, as you mentioned, people maybe are furloughed from their jobs or are looking for secondary streams or even new primary streams of income and are turning to sell on Amazon. And since the US market is already saturated, you've had a lot of success selling in other marketplaces. And as we saw on the last slide, I think the UK was the second biggest marketplace you're having success in. So can you tell us a little bit about the market in the United Kingdom and some of the growth successes you've seen there?
Yeah. So to be fully transparent, year over year, for the entirety of 2020, the growth hasn't looked this good. My challenge has been staying in stock over there. So I knew, it's like, I think it was Dave Ramsey I heard this quote from, Christmas is December 25th every year. Plan for it. And he meant more from like a personal finance, like, save up your money. Don't be surprised you have to buy your kids Christmas present type of thing. But the thing of it is, we as sellers know the holiday season's coming up. So this is a peak time for my business. I know some businesses are not quite as seasonal, but mine is very seasonal to the holiday season because a lot of the stuff I sell is giftable. So you can see here from a units perspective, it's I believe was like 49% for, just this morning for the past 30 days compared to that same 30-day period last year, which is great. I mean, that's almost a 50% increase. Whereas when you look at growth revenue wise, it's 77%. And I think some of that is because if you think about that, that means even though I'm getting more sales, people are paying more. And so per unit. And so that's great. And I think it just means people are willing to pay a little bit extra for that convenience of getting things. And I had made the executive decision. It's nice thing about being the entrepreneur is you can make your own executive decisions. Well, that can bite you. Sometimes it's a double-edged sword. But in this case, it worked out because going into it, I was like, you know what, let's just raise prices a little bit just to see how it works. Because I was starting to notice some of my products were lower priced compared to others. Because I think there's been the hammer dropped on VAT. So VAT is included in the selling price in the UK. And I think for a while, people weren't sending in VAT. And so they're just selling at lower prices. So they're like a lot of undercutting in the UK. But I think there's been a lot of cleanup of that the last year or so. And so I think that has also contributed to it. But I think just more in general, people are buying things online in the UK pretty heavily. And more people are getting things from Amazon. And so Amazon's making a growth play pretty much worldwide, wherever they are. But in this case, Amazon is, things are going pretty well. I can't say the same for everybody and their growth in the UK, but it's been a very good year, especially for UK.
Yeah, I think that's something that, we've seen, especially too, is, 2020 recap reports are starting to come out from, sellers, from marketplace consultants, from big banks, whoever it may be. The consumer habits are really just changing. The pandemic has really been the catalyst in that. I think you mentioned before, being able to shop on your phone and that digitally first focus, which is something I find myself doing, whether, I'm walking around, I'm trying to get outside or just scrolling on my phone and I see something, whether it be on a social media account or on a sports account or a news account, where I'm going to go to that app that I have from Amazon and maybe, purchase that product. Where previous to this, maybe I was out and having to go around and shop around and, have that native experience. Oh, looks like we just lost you there again, Kevin, but,
He's back.
Oh, welcome back.
Oh, I'm back. All right. So yeah, I think I was starting to say there was a time when, the internet first came out that people were very nervous to like put their credit card in. And I think that has pretty much gone away. So it was, at the time it was like, oh, I wouldn't, I put my credit card in the internet and, the hackers will take it or something like that. And then now it's like people are almost kind of more appalled by the sense of like, oh, you got to get in your car and then you got to fight for a parking space and then you got to walk into the mall and then like you don't remember if you're parked in the right side of the mall to the store you wanted to go to. And you realize that an app on your phone and something, yeah, maybe it takes a day or two to get to you, but you at least got it kind of mentally checked off your list of like, you got the satisfaction of knowing, okay, that purchase is made and I trust that it's coming, as opposed to spending 3 hours, to get in your car, fight traffic, get to the mall, whatever, and, walk around trying to find a store and then they're out of stock and, all this stuff. That's this big production when you go into a store, which in some cases still makes sense for some purchases. But I think for more and more purchases for a higher segment of the population, it's becoming more of a just get it on my phone and just have it arrive. And Amazon's logistics network in Europe is amazing. There was on a webinar, this was probably about a year ago or so, where they were talking about how at some of their fulfillment centers in the UK, from the time a product arrived and it got checked in, so the time they scan it is checked in, to the time the product could be at a customer's doorstep was 4 hours.
Wow.
And so that's incredible, because when you think about like, sometimes I put something in the mail and if it was to go to my next door neighbor, it might take 3 days,
Yeah, I think the supply chains have really been established and we're maxing them out this year. But talking about the consumer habits changing and consumer trust, one of the markets that we've seen the largest growth in as Amazon has started to dominate that market and introduce themselves is Australia, which I know you've had a lot of success in. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the growth that you've had in Australia and some of the success that you've seen?
Yeah, so Australia, I would say, is, for lack of a better term, an emerging marketplace. And so, Amazon.com has been around since I want to say 94. Whereas Australia has been around maybe 3 years, if my memory serves me correctly. And when I talk to people that live in Australia, they still talk eBay. eBay is the thing in Australia. Amazon hasn't quite got the market share, but they're cutting into it. And so I think with things like COVID, there's a lot of, positive and negative consequences of COVID that will be, with us for a long time. And I think for those of us in the Amazon world, it's in a lot of these emerging marketplaces, people are looking to Amazon, because of their distribution networks and things like that they already had in place in Australia. And that now all of a sudden, okay, people are more likely to buy there. So, Australia, it's not a huge country. I want to say maybe the population might be relative to the state of Florida. Might even be a little smaller than that.
I think you're right. It's in the 20s of millions.
Okay, gotcha. So then they're comparable.
Yeah.
So, when you think about it, like it's a good sized population. They haven't quite had the same level of adoption of Amazon, but I think there's still long-term growth. And so last year was my first holiday season on Australia. But when you look at this, I mean, yeah, the numbers aren't huge. And just in full transparency, when people look at the product sales in the kind of upper left, that's in Australian dollars, not US dollars. So it's about 1.4 to 1 off the top of my head. So it's not. So it's actually even a smaller if you make it in US dollars. But, it's taking products I already had and just offering them for sale and sending in a handful of units essentially into Australia and, getting sales that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And I'm getting the algorithm, I'm getting established in that country. And so I would say that's a big up and comer. When you look at like 400%, top line dollars, year over year, as well as units are up 500%, which every other marketplace that we were looking at was the other way around, where the growth was higher in top line dollars than it was in units. But when you're talking 400-500%, like it's growth either way, it's just, I think the mix was a little different of which products people were buying more of in Australia.
And in regards to Australia, I read a stat earlier today. the total number of visits to Amazon.com.au, which is their Australian site, was about 41 million visits in November 2020, and the previous year was just 25 million. So up 15 million year over year on a really nice growth trend. So I would anticipate that to continue. And like you said, eBay has dominated the market there for a long time, but there's other players absolutely in the space. There's other marketplaces like Catch and some other guys too. But with the global notoriety of how easy it is to sell via Amazon and the international marketplaces, kind of as you're showing us here, I would be surprised if more people got into Australia. Similarly, over the last 18 months to 2 years, Amazon has launched a number of new marketplaces. Singapore, Saudi Arabia, Sweden, Turkey is coming. I would trust the researchers and this decision behind one of the most valuable businesses in the world and the richest man in the world to see which market makes sense for them to enter. They obviously have realized that there is a significant amount of demand in those places. So why not be either A, taking advantage of that if it's an established market, as in some of the EU5, or be first mover. There's still opportunity to be first mover and grow your brand into a truly global brand, and not just in the US and not just the US and Europe. You could be across Asia, you could be across OPEC, and you could be across in the Middle East. It's really provided the opportunity for significant exposure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many places you could go and keep growing on Amazon. And, when I think about as an Amazon seller, we all know that fear of the red flag, that you're going to wake up one day, look in your Seller Central account, and you see that little red flag that there's a seller notification. And sometimes it's something totally benign, just an announcement they're making. Sometimes it could be that maybe your credit card changed or something like that, that you have on file with them, and maybe you need to update it, or it's maybe a listing was taken down, or you're concerned about your account. One of the things I've learned, and people have had all kinds of things. I had a couple of years ago a product taken down in the middle of the holiday season because all of a sudden Amazon was going after potentially hazardous materials. I have that going on in Italy right now with one of my products, and it's something that's I want to say it's something electrical related, but it's not an electrical product. So there's sometimes you have, or people last year were caught up in this whole pesticide thing, that things happen and then they generally will get resolved, but you can be stuck in the middle of it. But what I tend to find is those things that happen don't happen worldwide. They tend to be marketplace specific. So if the FDA comes down on Amazon about pesticides, and you sell shirts, and in your shirts you mentioned, because it's a long sleeve shirt, keep the mosquitoes away from your arm, and you suddenly got flagged as a pesticide. True story of somebody that I've worked with.
Wow.
You could still be selling in Canada and UK and Australia. Just because the FDA came down on Amazon in the US doesn't mean that that's going to happen in another country, because these other countries are sovereign nations with their own expectations. They could have, whatever. And so oftentimes Amazon's teams, Amazon's algorithms that, look at these type of things are marketplace specific. Now, if you're doing something totally egregious, maybe you're going to be taken down everywhere. But as long as you're at least making the good faith of effort of trying to go, by the rules and, do the right things are going to generally work out. And if something happens and you just get kind of caught up in one of those crazy things that happens in one marketplace, you almost have an insurance policy with the other marketplaces.
So Kevin, you're someone, who's sold on selling, on all these global marketplaces. Right. I think you've jumped through one, if not many, different hoops as issues have come up, and I'm assuming there've definitely been some stumbles and some learnings along the way. So as we sort of wrap up here, I would just love to know, what's your advice for sellers who are looking to expand or maybe level up their businesses, maybe test out new markets, and how can those sellers get a hold of you?
Yeah, great. I think the key is try and go for it. And so, Canada, I think, is one of the best ones to go into. I think it's one of the most overlooked marketplaces. And, if you remember from one of the earlier slides, my sales in Canada were pretty much on par with what my sales in the UK are. And there's a smaller population in Canada than there is in the UK. And so, if somebody wants to learn more, they can go on my YouTube channel. I've got a lot of free content where I walk through like how to get started in places like Canada. And it's just youtube.com/maximizing e-commerce. I did put together a checklist that'll walk you through step by step how you can launch your own international sales empire, so to speak. By all you got to do is head on over to maximizingecommerce.com/state, as in we're watching the state of e-commerce here. And so if you go to maximizingecommerce.com/state, you can sign up for a free checklist. And if you have any questions, feel free to message me directly. I can at least point you in the right direction. And if you're looking for somebody to just do it all for you, we can talk about that as well. I've got my team basically acts as people's project manager, and I've got, a few different solutions for that. But for the most part, if you at least download that checklist, it's going to give you it's pretty much going to give you the roadmap. I'll say that, of what you need to do to get launched.
That's great. So to reiterate that, it's maximizingecommerce.com/state to get that global checklist and how to expand globally. So Kevin, we want to, thank you so much for joining us on the state of e-commerce here. We've definitely enjoyed the conversation and learned a lot.
Awesome. Yeah, it was a good time. Thanks so much.
As always, guys, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.